Hello everyone, and welcome back to my Zero to Hero Challenge, Episode 3, where the goal of the challenge is to hit a Mythic Plus rating of 2500 starting from 0, through the use of Pugs only. I finished off last week with a rating of 1681 and an item level of 446. Just as a reminder, once this challenge series is finished with the Demon Hunter, I'll be letting my viewers and Reddit select my next class. I'll be putting up the poll along with next week's episode, so keep an eye out for that. As always, I started off the week by opening up my Great Vault. The options this week were a Mythic Track tier shoulders or a Hero Track ring. This choice was a no-brainer as I still haven't collected the 4-set tier bonus, so I quickly picked up the tier shoulders without giving it much thought. I started the stream a little late this week, and as such the Super Bloom event wasn't active as it normally is. To not waste time whilst waiting for the event to start, I ran my first dungeon, an 18 Dark Heart Thicket. The affixes this week are Fortified, Entangling and Bolstering. A pretty easy week as long as I don't overpull on trash and let the stacks get too high. The first dungeon of the week went great. There were only 2 deaths throughout this entire dungeon, and both occurred on the final boss, the Shade of Xavius. The first death was our Holy Priest, who stood inside one of the swirls during the second phase of the boss, when the boss was at around 12% HP. This killed him instantly. Our second death occurred not much longer after. The rogue was targeted by the growing paranoia ability and continued to stand on top of me, causing him to get feared into a swirl, which also killed him. A couple seconds after this, the boss fell, increasing my key level by 2 and my rating up to 1698. I wish all of my dungeons went this well. After completing the first dungeon, the Super Bloom event was about to begin, so I picked up the weekly quests for the event and the Worthy Ally. While the Super Bloom was underway, I did quickly complete some other world quests and joined the Super Bloom around halfway through. Upon handing in the 2 weekly quests, I received a cape and a glaive, but neither of these were an upgrade for me, so I moved on to the next dungeon, a plus 20 Galakron Fall. With this being the first plus 20 key, I was really hoping that I could time it to begin the process of unlocking my first teleport. The downside is, due to this being a Dawn of the Infinite dungeon, I needed both Rise and Fall completed at a level 20 in order to unlock the teleport. The start of the dungeon went great, with all the trash, including the first boss, going down without any deaths. Unfortunately, there were a couple of deaths while clearing out the second boss's room. The first one occurred on the Coalesce time during his Temporal Detonation ability. Our evoker dipped a little bit too low and got killed off by the ability. The next couple of deaths occurred on the very next pack of mobs. Firstly, the Paladin got 2 debuffs on him during the trash pack, which chunked down his health and eventually killed him. Once the pack was at around 50% HP, the leeches on the edge of the room managed to get pulled. This resulted in the initial trash dying and bolstering the leeches, which then proceeded to cast Enervate on the healer, eventually killing him. Normally I would interrupt this ability, but Disrupt didn't come off cooldown until 1 second after the cast had started. With the healer dead, we almost very nearly lost the evoker again too, but luckily he managed to survive and we finished off the remaining leeches. The final death before the second boss occurred on the Time Stream Anomaly, which patrols around the room. The evoker was targeted by the Bloom debuff at the same time as the swirl appeared under his feet. He moved away, but unfortunately I clipped him with the frontal ability of the mob, which was enough to kill him. Other than these 4 deaths, we reached the manifested time waves with 23 minutes remaining on the key. So far, making good time. I pulled the boss and everything was going great right up until the boss hit around 40% health remaining. Here, things started to go terribly wrong. The Paladin took some fragments of time orbs to the face as he initially moved to avoid them and then suddenly stopped to stand still and let the orbs hit him, killing him very quickly. Just after this set of orbs, the boss put out his 2 chrono faded debuffs. Whilst the evoker was quite low on HP, the evoker got dispelled while standing inside a slow quadrant of the room, which was enough to finish him off. The warrior wasn't too far away from the evoker at this time and was also hit by the wave coming out just as his own debuff expired, which killed him. Only myself and the monk healer remained, while the boss was at 30% health. Despite being 3 DPS down, myself and the healer managed to kill the boss, However, it did take us quite a while, taking the kill time of the boss up to 4 minutes and 32 seconds. We rezzed everyone and carried on. It was here that our evoker didn't accept the res and eventually disconnected. Hoping he would come back, we continued to clear out the rest of the dungeon. Just as we were clearing the final pack before the third boss, I leapt in without preparing a defensive and died instantly. Completely my mistake here, and was a death which could have very easily been avoided. With my death, the rest of the group followed, taking us up to a total of 11 deaths. We released, ran back, and on the second attempt killed the trash. We continued on and killed the third boss without issues. Everyone seemed to understand how to handle the blight mechanic, which made the fight very simple, and despite being a DPS player down, we killed the boss rather quickly and had roughly 8 minutes left on the clock, making the dungeon still timeable despite being a DPS down. We had one more death while clearing to Iridicron. One of the mobs had a whirlwind ability, and not long before its demise used it while being bolstered, which very quickly killed our healer. Other than this one death, however, though, we reached Iridicron. Whilst being one player short, I knew this boss was going to be very difficult, as Chromie tends to die rather quickly without everyone correctly stacking, but we decided to give it a go anyway. The first Stonecracker barrage occurred, and my fears were realised. Chromie died on the third hit of the ability, and the boss proceeded to cast his obliteration ability, killing us all. With this wipe, the dungeon was no longer timeable, but we decided to give the boss another go. The second attempt went better. We managed to survive the first Stonecracker barrage. However, during the Earth Surge ability, the paladin got hit and died. As we had no form of combat res with the remaining players, I knew the next Stonecracker barrage would kill us. We broke the shield on the boss and continued fighting him until the ability came out, and as predicted, Chromie died immediately, once again causing the boss to cast obliteration and wiping us. The group decided to give it one final attempt, as we knew if everyone stayed alive we could keep Chromie up, despite the evokers still being offline. During this attempt, the exact same issue occurred. The paladin got hit during the Earth Surge ability, killing him and resulting in us not being able to keep Chromie up during the following Stonecracker barrage, wiping us yet again, and spelling the end of our dungeon as people wanted to leave. A very unfortunate dungeon, which could have very easily been timed if not for the DC on the second boss onwards. Whilst making a group for the now downgraded 19 Galakron Fall Key, I upgraded some of my gear with the crests I had available and made my way to the dungeon once again. The dungeon went so much smoother this time. With our first death occurring on the manifested timeways, our rogue had a DC on the boss and proceeded to get hit by the fragments of time which killed him. I suspect he may have had a similar issue that I used to have in this dungeon with constant DCs. For those of you that would like to know, I seem to have fixed this issue by changing my DirectX setting from 12 to 11 in WoW. If you're having issues with AMD graphics cards too, I'd recommend giving this a try to see if my solution works for you too. Despite the DC on the boss, we killed him relatively quickly, and unlike the evoker in the previous dungeon, the rogue returned. Other than this one death, we didn't have any more until we reached the final boss of the dungeon. During the boss's first Earth Surge ability, the warrior got hit and died instantly. As we didn't have a combat res in the group, I was a little bit concerned for the upcoming Stonecracker barrage. Fortunately, we were able to survive it and phased the boss not much longer after his second Earth Surge. We were a DPS down, however, for this phase, which made the damage check rather tight, as we didn't have Bloodlust up for it. The boss's health slowly ticked down along with the timer for the obliteration ability, and when there was 0.5 seconds remaining before the ability went off, the boss hit 85% and flew away, two-chesting the key and raising my rating up to 1,753. My key turned into a 21 Throne of the Tides. However, I really don't enjoy this dungeon. With this in mind, I downgraded the key so that I could get through it more quickly and easily, bringing it down to a level 18 key. In hindsight, I should have probably just dropped it to a level 20 and tried from there. As a side note, these next two dungeons I forgot to hit record at the start of them, and as such some of the clips will be from my stream that I had to download after, so I apologise for any drop in quality you may see in some of the clips here on out. Throne of the Tides ended up going pretty smooth, with only a couple of deaths occurring throughout the run. This really made me regret lowering the key too much, but with me only having a small amount of time each week to commit to this challenge, I cannot risk failing 2 dungeons in a week. Our first deaths occurred whilst clearing out the second boss's room of trash. I made a pull of 2 packs, one of the set of casters on the left side of the room, along with the pack of patrolling snapdragons. A poor choice of a pull due to the bolstering weak. The dragons died, buffering the casters, causing them to hit very hard and killing me very quickly, while the rest of the group followed me in death. The healer managed to keep himself alive at least, giving us 4 deaths before we reached the first boss. We ran back, finished clearing the trash, and proceeded to kill the first boss without incident. Other than this one wipe, there was only one more death that occurred through the run. That occurred on the way to the third boss. The Faceless Watcher casted his clenching tentacle ability, which puts a big AoE warning around him. The Death Knight ran back in a little too soon, getting hit by the ability and dying. The rest of the dungeon was a breeze. We took our time clearing the gauntlet on the way to the final boss, ensuring no deaths occurred. The final boss fell with around 8 minutes left on the timer, allowing us to 2-chest this dungeon, raising my rating up to 1,845. I was also lucky enough to get some 467 item level boots, which I equipped, raising my item level up to 450. At this point, I'm really just hoping for some gloves or chest that I can upgrade into tier gear for my 4-set bonus. With time for only one more dungeon and my key becoming a Dark Hack Thicket 20, a dungeon which I think I could comfortably run, I unfortunately wouldn't have gained much rating, as I already had the dungeon completed on an 18 for both a fortified and tyrannical week, so I instead opted to try and get some rating in a key that I had a low rating on or no rating for on a fortified week. The key I ended up getting invited to was an 18 Everbloom, a key in which I had not touched on a fortified week so far. Completing this would give me plenty of Mythic Plus rating. This dungeon I feel like is one of the more annoying dungeons to do during a bolstering week due to the small flowers which die very quickly, giving stacks to the rest of the mobs. At the start of the dungeon, I made a double pull, pulling the 2 initial first packs together. This pull is made much easier thanks to the Demon Hunter's ability of Sigil of Silence. As I predicted, the flowers died quickly, which resulted in the rest of the mobs getting buffed up too much, letting them kill us all. I released and ran back in trying to gain aggro again, but dying once again shortly after, as their stacks was too high. The rest of the group used the same tactic and continued to release and run back in. By the time we killed the pack, we had amassed a total of 7 deaths. 2 packs later we had another death. I picked up 4 of the stingers and they started to place their poison debuff out on players. While this was ongoing, I tried to move the mobs back, but someone ran in a little too close and managed to pull a pack of flowers that wasn't too far away from them. As this happened, our rogue died to the debuff. The dead petals died rather quickly, which resulted in us having a fairly buffed stinger mob. Luckily, it had just used its poison debuff already before getting buffed and was at low HP, so I kited the mob back while everyone else finished it off. 8 deaths in already within the first couple of minutes isn't the best start, but we kept on going. The timers on dungeons this season are very generous, so this is still quite easy to time. There was one more death on the second to last pack before the first boss. Our Demon Hunter DPS began bursting the mobs as soon as I pulled them, generating more threat than I could within the first few seconds, and as a result, the mobs targeted him and killed him within a couple of melee hits. We finished off this pack and the remaining pack and then proceeded to kill the first boss too. We killed the first boss within its first intermission phase without any deaths, leaving us at a total of 24 minutes left on the key. Not too bad considering the 9 deaths we'd had up to this point. I made some rather small pulls between the first and the second boss owing to the abominations. I didn't want to risk them getting too many stacks of bolstering, as they can quickly wipe the group with their very large hitting AoE ability. Despite my cautiousness, there was one pack with a Berserker, Cultivator and multiple flowers, which can be quite difficult if the DPS burst down the flowers first. In this case they did, and we had 2 very big mobs to deal with as a result, a Cultivator and Berserker. The DPS were grouped up and the Berserker used his Whirlwind ability, proceeding to one-shot the healer and Demon Hunter DPS, almost taking the rogue with them too. Fortunately, he seemed to have his cheat death ability up, allowing him to survive. Unfortunately, when the pack died, the rogue got a little bit too close to the patrol and ended up aggroing them. With his very low health, this enabled the mob to just hit him with one melee attack, finishing him off. I picked up the mobs while everyone else was running back and we killed them, taking us up to a grand total of 12 deaths. We had one more death before the second boss. On the final pack, we ended up getting 2 heavily bolstered berserkers once again, that when using their whirlwind ability managed to one-shot our mage. I continued to kite the mobs a little while the DPS finished them off. Once the mobs were dead, we rezzed the mage and pulled the second boss. The boss died without any complications, as it is only a fortified week, the bosses are relatively easy. On the way to the third boss, I got a little too overconfident and pulled 2 of the packs of mages thinking we could kill them even if they got bolstered, providing we could interrupt them. I unfortunately forgot about the uninterruptible AoE that they also place. The Ice Caller and Pyromancer got buffed greatly by the assistants, with their damage then becoming enough to overwhelm and kill us, taking us up to 18 deaths. Our 19th death occurred on the pack just after, a solo Arcanomancer. With everyone stacking in melee, the Arcanomancer placed his ability on the ground in between everyone, as we didn't have anyone at range to bait the orb. This one shot our healer, we killed the mage and then waited for the monk to catch back up to us. The next couple of deaths occurred on the pack of 3 mages just before the third boss. The Arcanomancer used his spatial disruption ability targeted on our healer, who didn't move out of the way, proceeding to get himself one shot. While avoiding the orbs myself, and the mage got hit by the frozen orbs, getting ourselves frozen. I managed to survive, but the mage did not. I continued tanking the mobs, interrupting where I could. The rogue fell a little bit later towards the end of the pack to a frostbolt from the Ice Caller. By this point, the healer had managed to catch up and help me and the other demon hunter finish off the mobs. Once we regrouped, we pulled the Archmage and killed her with no deaths and made our way to the final boss of the dungeon. Again, as this is a fortified week, the bosses went down without any trouble. Despite the 22 deaths throughout the dungeon, we still managed to time it with 5 minutes remaining on the key. This rose my rating up to a total of 1,992. I didn't get an item, but decided to celebrate my newfound rating by seeing if I could jump off the platform of the final boss. Turns out you can, and I died. So to summarize this week, I raised my item level up to 450 in total and my Mythic Plus rating to 1,992. That's all for this episode. If you did enjoy the video, please do give it a like, comment and subscribe, as it really does help out the channel. See you next time and have a good one.